She shouldn't be touching him. That was the first thing whispered by the woman in the red satin gown at the next table. Just loud enough for 3 others to hear, in the middle of a polished dance floor at a 7-figure gala. A 10-year-old boy in metal braces was trembling, his hand reaching toward a black server. No music cue, no announcement, just a glance upward. And a hand extended. Everyone froze, including the billionaire father seated barely 6 feet away. A man who had always believed his son was too fragile, too broken, and certainly too embarrassed to do something like this. But the server didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She simply untied her apron and placed her hand in his. In a world where money can buy silence, service, and control, she gave the boy something his father never had the courage to offer: the right to lead. And just a few faltering steps later, the father's entire world began to crumble. The hush that descended over the Grand Oak, Los Angeles's most prestigious banquet hall, was palpable, thick like fog. Laughter evaporated, silverware froze midair, and a multitude of bewildered gazes turned toward the small dance floor nestled between the tables. 10-year-old Mateo Castillo shook with anticipation. His legs, encased in metallic supports, trembled as he reached out toward Aisha Thompson, the establishment's only black server. The gentle notes of a live violin began to fill the air, and without a moment's hesitation, Mateo's desire to dance surged forth. "Mr. Castillo, please control your son." The manager's voice cut like a knife through the stillness. "This is not a place for such antics. Our staff is not here to entertain children." Emilio Castillo, renowned entrepreneur and one of the wealthiest individuals in the state, found his throat tightening. It was the first time since the accident that had left Mateo with limited mobility 2 years prior that he had dared to take him out to a public event. "Mateo, sit down," he commanded, his tone low but unmistakably firm. Aisha stood rooted, her gaze shifting between the manager, the billionaire, and the small hands still poised in the air. After 5 years of blending into the background, she had perfected the art of invisibility when it came to patrons like Emilio. "Mr. Sanders, I'm clocking out. My shift is finished." Her voice was steady as she removed her apron, placing it on a nearby tray. To everyone's astonishment, she smiled warmly at Mateo and clasped his hand. "I can't dance in an apron." Emilio sprang to his feet, disbelief etched across his face. "What are you doing?" Aisha met his gaze steadily. "I'm accepting his invitation, sir." Before anyone could intervene, Mateo took a tentative step forward. His foot scraped painfully against the polished floor, and the metal of his braces screeched in protest. Yet Aisha didn't rush him. She simply matched her pace to his. "She's getting fired for this," a nearby woman whispered. Emilio stood frozen, memories flooding back. Isabella, his late wife, twirling with Mateo in their living room, laughing as she said, "It's not about perfection. It's about connection." As Aisha followed Mateo's uncertain movements, something shifted in the boy's expression. Fear morphed into fierce determination. Embarrassment transformed into newfound pride. For the first time since the accident, he was not being controlled or corrected. He was leading. "Mr. Castillo," the manager's voice broke through the moment, "I assure you this will not happen again. She will be appropriately reprimanded." Emilio remained silent, the weight of expectation heavy in the air. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, aware that a man of his stature could easily ruin careers with a single word. Yet in his mind, Mateo's radiant smile was the only sound that resonated. Aisha guided Mateo back to the table after 3 hesitant dance steps. "Thank you for inviting me," she said with a sincerity that belied the formality of the moment. "It was an honor." As she turned to leave, Emilio called to her. "Wait." His voice trembled slightly, almost foreign to his own ears. "What's your full name?" "Aisha Thompson, sir." Emilio nodded slowly. "Aisha Thompson," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. Then he pulled a business card from his jacket and extended it toward her. "Meet me at my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. The entire hall held its breath. Aisha took the card, her expression inscrutable, though her hand betrayed a slight tremor. "Dad," Mateo called after her. "Why did you do that?" The question lingered, heavy and accusatory. Emilio turned to his son, and in that fleeting moment saw not just the boy Isabella had left in his care, but a complex human being whose needs he had neglected for 2 long years. As the dinner resumed in uneasy silence, no one noticed Aisha's glance back before she exited. Not out of fear, but with a quiet resolve that contrasted sharply with the tempest brewing in Emilio Castillo's heart. The lobby of Castillo Enterprises gleamed with marble and glass, refracting the morning sun into dazzling patterns. Aisha felt acutely out of place in her best outfit, a simple teal dress purchased on clearance. The people passing by her wore suits that likely cost more than her rent. She thought, "Aisha Thompson here to see Mr. Castillo," she announced to the receptionist, who regarded her with an appraising eye before making a call. 18th floor. "Ms. Reynolds will see you." In the elevator, Aisha steadied her breath, clutching her worn handbag against her chest. It wasn't fear that gripped her. It was a quiet determination, born from having faced far worse. Ms. Reynolds, a woman in her 40s with a sharp gaze and impeccable posture, greeted her. "Mr. Castillo is in a meeting. Please follow me." As they traversed the mirrored corridors, Aisha felt the weight of curious stares from employees. A black woman being escorted through executive offices was unusual enough to raise eyebrows. "He had you fired, didn't he?" Reynolds asked bluntly once they were alone in a waiting room. "It happens. Powerful clients dictate terms, and people like you lose their jobs." "People like me?" Aisha replied, her tone steady. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean," Reynolds replied, adjusting her glasses. "Employees who don't know their place." Aisha flashed a wry smile. "And exactly where would that place be?" Before Reynolds could respond, her phone buzzed. "He'll see you now." Emilio Castillo's office consumed half the floor. Through the expansive windows, Los Angeles sprawled like a distant realm. "Mr. Castillo," Aisha greeted, her voice formal yet confident. Emilio turned to face her, a mask of composure. "Ms. Thompson, thank you for coming." He gestured to a chair. "Please have a seat." The silence that followed felt intentional, a tactic Aisha recognized immediately, designed to make nervous individuals over-explain themselves. "Do you have a relevant background?" Emilio finally inquired. "Excuse me, education, college?" Aisha held his gaze unwaveringly. "Bachelor's in childhood education from UCLA. Some coursework completed toward a master's in special needs education." A flicker of surprise crossed Emilio's face. "And you're a waitress?" "I juggle 3 jobs, waiting tables, working at a bookstore on weekends, and tutoring when I can find students." Emilio leaned forward, flipping through a folder. "I did some research on you, Ms. Thompson. I wanted to understand the person who hesitated and danced with my son." He revealed printed photos of a community center freedom movement, which she co-founded 6 years prior. Aisha straightened in her seat. "I started it with my sister Mia, a dance program for children with disabilities." Emilio leafed through documents, which is now facing closure due to lack of funds. Aisha remained unfazed. Of course he would uncover that in a heartbeat. "I didn't come here to ask you for money, Mr. Castillo." "Then why did you come?" "Because you invited me." Emilio chuckled softly, a hollow sound. "Fair enough." He rose, restless. "I want you to work for me." Aisha blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "As a server in your establishment," his expression hardened. "As a therapeutic companion for Mateo." The name came out with difficulty. Aisha noticed his eyes flicker to a photo on his desk. A beautiful woman cradling a baby. "I have the best specialists available," Emilio continued. "Physical therapists, neurologists, child psychologists. But what you did yesterday..." He hesitated, struggling for the right words. "It was just a dance, Mr. Castillo." It was the first time I've seen him smile since the accident. The admission hung heavy in the air. "I don't want a dancer for my son. I want someone who can do what you did, follow, not lead." Aisha scrutinized the man before her, beneath his facade of power. She sensed a desperate, lost father. "I can offer you 5 times your current salary." Aisha stood abruptly. "No." Emilio's expression shifted to shock, as if he had never before heard that word. "You're turning down an offer that could resolve your financial issues out of pride, out of dignity," Aisha clarified. "And because your son deserves more than someone hired to feign concern." She walked toward the door, pausing briefly. "Mateo doesn't need more experts. He needs the freedom to lead his own life." "You don't know my son." "No," she agreed. "But I know children like him. People whose physical limitations are dwarfed by the invisible barriers we erect around them." She withdrew a business card from her purse and set it on the table. "Freedom Movement classes on Wednesdays and Fridays at 4 p.m. If you'd like to bring Mateo, the first session is complimentary." As Aisha left, she passed Reynolds, who had been eavesdropping. "You just turned down an offer from Emilio Castillo," she whispered incredulously. "Are you out of your mind?" Aisha smiled. "Maybe. But I'd rather be crazy than just another pawn." The following Wednesday, Aisha stood at the reception desk of the community center when Mia, her sister and co-founder, rushed in breathlessly. "There's a luxury car parked outside," she whispered, adjusting her headscarf. "And you won't believe who's inside." Through the window, Aisha caught sight of the opulent vehicle. Mateo sat in the back, anxiously peering out, while Emilio remained in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel as if engaged in an internal battle. "He's not coming in," Mia predicted. "Men like him don't step foot in places like this." Aisha smiled, recalling Mateo's wide-eyed wonder during their brief dance. "Don't underestimate a determined boy." As they watched, the car door opened. Mateo stepped out slowly, adjusting his braces. To their surprise, Emilio exited too, clearly out of his element in casual pants and a sweater, an obvious attempt to dress down while still radiating privilege. "I told you he would come," Aisha murmured, mostly to herself. Mia stared at her in disbelief. "What did you do?" Aisha remained silent, her eyes sparkling with a secret that even Mia could not fully comprehend. In her modest apartment in East LA, hidden beneath her bed, lay a notebook brimming with observations about children like Mateo and men like Emilio Castillo, years of research, strategy, and a vision that began with a single dance invitation. What Emilio Castillo could not fathom, what lay beyond his understanding in his world of glass towers and endless fortunes, was that Aisha Thompson was not merely a waitress who had danced with his son. She was a woman on a mission, and his empire of isolation and privilege was about to confront its most profound challenge. The undeniable truth that some of life's most significant lessons cannot be purchased, they must be experienced. Freedom Movement operated out of a repurposed community warehouse. Handmade posters adorned the walls with phrases like, "Your rhythm, your rules, and every step matters." As Emilio and Mateo entered, children with various mobility aids practiced movements to the rhythm of a light beat. "Ms. Thompson," Aisha greeted, wearing simple attire bearing the program's logo. "Welcome." Mateo observed the children in awe. A girl in a wheelchair twirled effortlessly while a boy with a prosthetic leg crafted a sequence of steps. "It looks chaotic," Emilio remarked, discomfort evident. "There's structure," Aisha replied. "It's just not the structure you're accustomed to." She turned to Mateo. "Would you like to join in?" The boy nodded eagerly but glanced at his father, hesitating. "Go ahead," Emilio urged tensely. "I'll be right here." As Aisha guided Mateo toward the group, Mia approached Emilio, offering him a chair. "The first day is always challenging," she noted. "For the parents, not the kids." "This isn't therapy," Emilio countered. "I've hired the best rehabilitation specialists." "And how has that been working for Mateo?" Mia asked gently. At that moment, the studio doors swung open, revealing an elderly woman leaning on an ornate cane. Her silver hair was elegantly braided, and she commanded attention. "Dr. Elaine Mercer," Mia whispered, "neuroscientist specializing in neuroplasticity, retired from UCLA." The woman greeted several children before her gaze landed on Emilio. "Mr. Castillo, You rejected my research proposal 3 times in the past 2 years. Dr. Mercer, I didn't expect to see you here. I oversee the research program, she informed him. We're studying how non-directive movement approaches impact neural reconfiguration in children with motor disabilities. Research. Emilio frowned. I thought this was merely a community dance class. Aisha returned, leaving Mateo to explore movements with another child. Freedom Movement is a pilot rehab program based on the principles of movement autonomy, she explained. We combine adaptive dance with neuroscientific foundations. Why are you waiting tables if you're leading a research program? Because we lack adequate funding and because people like you have turned us down 3 times. The realization dawned on him. You were Dr. Mercer's assistant on those proposals. Co-author. Dr. Mercer corrected. Aisha had to leave college to care for her sister. But her theoretical work is groundbreaking. You recognized me at the restaurant? Emilio asked. From the moment you walked in, Aisha affirmed. And when Mateo chose to dance, I identified an opportunity to demonstrate, not explain. Was it orchestrated? The dance? Absolutely not. Mateo chose to rise. I chose to follow. Suddenly, a group of reporters entered the studio. Emilio immediately tensed. What's this? Part 2 of the plan. Aisha smiled subtly. Mia showed Emilio a freshly published article. Innovative motor rehabilitation methodology shows promising results. We published our initial findings today, Dr. Mercer explained, and invited the press. You used my son as a public relations tool. Emilio's voice turned icy. Aisha led him into a side room adorned with photos of numerous children, each accompanied by handwritten progress notes. One wall featured an empty frame. What's that? He inquired. Our future, the rehabilitation center we could establish with the necessary resources. 500 children annually instead of 50. You orchestrated all of this. Emilio muttered. The dance, the meeting, bringing me here on press day. I seized an opportunity and acted. Aisha replied. For months ago, when you canceled our meeting without reviewing the proposal, I vowed to find a way. Diana, Mia interrupted. It's Mateo. They hurried back. Mateo stood at the center of the room, encircled by other children. The music had stopped, and everyone watched in silence. The boy had removed one of his braces and was attempting to balance on just one support. Mateo. Emilio started forward, but Aisha halted him. Wait, she whispered. Watch. Mateo inhaled deeply, focused intently, and then, to everyone's astonishment, especially his father's, he managed to take a complete step without full support. It was small, shaky, but undeniably his. The children erupted in cheers, and camera shutters clicked furiously. Emilio's face, typically composed and unreadable, was now raw with emotion, tears shimmering in his eyes. That's why we created Freedom Movement, Aisha said softly. It's not about flawless steps. It's about taking your first steps on your own. Emilio observed his son, no longer a problem to be managed, but a whole person discovering his own strength. This could have been handled differently, he said finally. It could have been if you had answered our calls or reviewed our proposals 3 times. The reporters took notice of Emilio, and murmurs spread as Mateo, oblivious to the tension, continued practicing his new step with determination. Emilio Castillo was at a crossroads. Before him lay 2 choices. Withdraw in anger, cementing his reputation as cold and calculating, or embrace the moment his son had created, straddling the divide between the power he had always wielded and the freedom Mateo so desperately needed. Emilio found himself in uncharted territory, one where his wealth and influence held no authority. The man who had controlled every detail of his life now faced a choice that no amount of money could influence. His gaze oscillated between his beaming son and the expectant reporters. Humility was a foreign concept for him. But as he observed the transformation on Mateo's face, something within him began to shift. The orchestra of power and privilege he was accustomed to now played a new melody, and he had to decide. Would he continue to lead, or would he learn to follow? Emilio Castillo faced the reporters waiting for his comments. His son had just taken a monumental step before the cameras, and Aisha Thompson had skillfully led him to this pivotal moment. "Mr. Castillo," one reporter posed, "could you comment on your presence at Freedom Movement today? Is it true that your foundation rejected funding for this program thrice?" Emilio glanced at Mateo, who was still practicing his new step, oblivious to the political currents swirling around them. Then, to everyone's astonishment, especially Aisha's, he smiled. "You know what's most challenging for someone in my position?" Emilio spoke directly to the reporter, yet loud enough for all to hear, admitting, "When we're wrong." A stunned silence envelops the room. The Castillo Foundation is delighted to announce a commitment to fully fund Freedom Movement for the next 5 years, and to establish a permanent rehabilitation center based on the methodology developed by Dr. Mercer and Ms. Thompson. Camera flashes erupted. Mia gasped in surprise. "On one condition," he added, watching Aisha tense, "that Ms. Thompson retains complete autonomy over the program and its methodology. No corporate interference." 3 months later, bulldozers cleared the site for the new Freedom Movement Rehabilitation Center. While it may not have been the most lavish project the Castillo Foundation had ever financed, it was the most innovative, designed with input from children and their families. Aisha frequently supervised the construction, always joined by Mateo, who often brought other children along. To everyone's astonishment, Emilio Castillo also appeared regularly, observing the progress with quiet contemplation. "I never thought you'd actually attend board meetings," Aisha remarked one afternoon as they reviewed plans. "I never expected I'd have to study neuroplasticity at 50. Emilio replied, rubbing his tired eyes. Before him lay a scientific article marked with sticky notes. "But here we are," Aisha responded, regarding him curiously. "Is this part of your public penance, or do you genuinely care?" Mateo requested to have his second brace removed last week. "I'm aware," she stated. His previous therapist claimed that would be impossible for another 2 years. Aisha smiled. "But you fired her, remember? Because you believed she was mistaken. And she was." Aisha pointed to a photo of Mateo balancing with just one crutch. "He's advancing more quickly than any traditional medical predictions suggested." "Why didn't you accept my apology?" Emilio asked suddenly. "Because you never apologized. You redirected resources, changed policies, funded our program. That's not an apology. It's compensation." Emilio nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Again, at the opening ceremony 6 months later, the transformation from that night in the banquet hall could not have been starker. The expansive adaptive space buzzed with children using various mobility devices, each moving freely. In the center of the main hall, Mateo, now wearing only a lightweight brace on his left leg, led a small choreographed routine with 3 other children. His movements were still limited, yet they flowed with a confidence no doctor had predicted. Emilio watched from a distance, refraining from interfering. "He doesn't need you to hold him anymore," Aisha remarked quietly as she approached. "No," Emilio concurred, "but he still needs me to be present. A crucial distinction," Aisha noted, turning to face him. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what exactly?" she inquired. "For teaching me how to follow." A reporter approached. "Mr. Castillo, how does it feel to witness your son's progress?" Emilio looked at Mateo, who was now assisting a younger girl in finding her balance. Proud not of what he had overcome but of what he had created for others. "And what's been the most significant lesson you've learned throughout this journey?" Emilio Castillo, once only known for his financial empire, looked directly into the camera. "True leaders aren't those who guide others down a path they believe is right. They are those who possess the courage to follow when someone reveals a better way." A year later, the Freedom Movement program expanded to 3 new cities. Aisha received the Pediatric Rehabilitation Innovation Award, and her methodology began to be implemented in hospitals nationwide. Mateo, now relying solely on a light cane on difficult days, enrolled in a regular school and became a youth ambassador for the program, inspiring other children to discover their own pace. And Emilio learned the most challenging and invaluable lesson of all. True power does not reside in controlling every move, but in recognizing when it's time to step back and allow others to take the lead. In a world where powerful individuals rarely shift their perspectives and those without power often remain in the shadows, the story of Emilio, Aisha, and Mateo serves as a reminder that genuine transformation occurs when we traverse the invisible boundaries that divide us. When a billionaire learns from a server, when a father follows in his son's footsteps. If this tale of how a simple gesture of dignity catalyzed profound change touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We believe that the most significant revolutions don't begin with grand manifestos or immense fortunes. They commence when someone has the courage to take an authentic first step, and someone else possesses the wisdom to follow.